I believe we should be live because it's telling me that we're live. Great. We don't need to do any introduction. I think let's do DaVinci and then we'll do Final Cut and then we'll do Max in that order. Sound good?
Awesome.
So, yeah, I'll turn it over to Brian.
Alrighty. I'm going to try sharing my screen and we're going to get that rolling. Alrighty, and y'all can see my grotesquely overpopulated desktop now with all sorts of junk on it.
No, that's nothing.
Wonderful. All right. So DaVinci is a free software that's pretty cool that I am a big fan of because it is objectively, in my opinion, significantly better than iMovie because it allows me to do a couple of very specific things that I think are both fit well into the style of a lot of the music videos that we do, and also I think looks pretty it's pretty easy to get it looking pretty good. So the thing that I want to show y'all, we're going to make a new project. And so this is like the first thing you get to, right? It's pretty standard. You have your like where the clips show up over there, where you drag stuff into down there, and then this has random things that are different each time. So I put here together, ideally, hopefully what you're going to come into this, your video editing session with is you'll have videos from each of the people who submitted, who are playing part of your work, and then also like a final mix from your audio engineer. And just for reference, the context of what we're trying to do is in the end of this, we want to be able to have like a cool screen set up where you see essentially like the acapella style, everyone in different, everyone viewed on the screen at the same time with people like coming in and out as they're like saying different things or as they appear or disappear. And so that's like the end goal of where we're going to try to get with this. So to start with, this is a pretty short sample I put together for y'all, just recorded some short videos. So the first thing, I always just hit sure change with that. And so this is like the first example. It's me playing mandolin. Second sample here is a guitar clip. It's pretty generic, boring guitar stuff. And then lastly, we're also going to drag in this like final mix down copy from our audio engineer, AKA me dragging things into Audacity and being like, that's good. The first things that I always do whenever I import all of the clips like this, first thing I always do is I line them up. So you'll notice here in the bottom screen that all of these have like the waveforms printed underneath them, which is really helpful. You'll also notice that all of them have a nice sharp spike at the beginning. At the beginning of all of the videos that I take, and I advertise or would recommend that you do the same, put a nice big clap at the beginning of any recording. So that way it's much easier to line things up to a clap than it is to like line up a slow viola crescendo or something. It's very hard to tell the start of that in a waveform like this, but it's very easy to say like, okay, well, we know that both people clapped at the same time, so we'll drag all the claps to be right on top of each other. So that's essentially what we're going to do, is we're just going to drag everything around until the claps look like they're right on top of each other. And we say, that's kind of close enough. And then what we do, because kind of close enough really looks bad when you're doing highly timed things, you can go down here to the edit bar. So here there's a couple of things across the bottom. Edit is one. Edit and cut are the two that I use most of the time. I've had to go into color once, and it was for a really weird application, and I've never used the other one, so don't know what's there. And edit is cool because here we have the ability to like zoom in more closely, so we can say, okay, well, the bottom one was our clip that we really liked, so we're going to try to align everything to that. Okay, so. All right, and so when you zoom in this far, you'll also notice that it gets kind of like choppy on how granular you can move things around. But remembering that this is a clap, that's a pretty specific thing. So if we listen to all three of them together like this, we'll see if our ears can hear the difference. That's a little messy, but good enough for government work for now. So what we're going to do next is, our clips are now reasonably well aligned. We see the spikes here of the mandolin, doing its thing kind of match up with the spikes we see here. So, in general, looks like it should be good enough to work. Next thing we want to do is we want to edit what we see, right? So what we're going to do for that is we're just going to hit play here, and you'll notice that, suddenly we're only seeing the guitar because the guitar's on top. So there's this button here, which is the tools button, which is really helpful. It's the edit and drag things around button, essentially. So you click on this and you notice a toolbar showed up here. This toolbar has the ability to make things bigger and smaller. And so the classic thing that I would do is I would make that and drag it over here. And then I'd select this one, make it a little smaller, and maybe put it over here. You'll notice we also have the crop button for if any of your performers are like me and don't bother to clean up their space around them before they video record. You can use the crop sliders to kind of narrow things down. You'll also notice that the crop sliders sometimes pull in from the wrong side. I think that's a bug. I just deal with it, and just fair warning, that's something that might happen. So if we go back to the move tool, now we have two nice-ish cropped videos that appear next to each other. So now if I put y'all over there, if I go back to the beginning, we clap together, and now we start playing together, right? So that's the general workflow of what I do. And then, you can go over to the end, select all, and then Command B is the command to automatically cut things. So you can just delete stuff off the end, and now, it ends nicely all at the same time. You can do the same thing at the beginning. So all, cut, go through, delete those. Right, Movavi, or I'm sorry, DaVinci is also pretty cool, because working with titles is pretty straightforward as well. You can just, drag in a text title, and you can also just how you aligned the video clips to be, kind of on top of each other by their audio waveform. You can also do the cool thing where, have the name of the composition show up on the first downbeat, right? So you go to the edit menu again, you hit the text button here, open inspector, and then you can say my awesome title, right? And then you use the move around button to stick it up over there. And then you're like, that's an ugly font. We want a different font. So you open the inspector again and you're like, Windings, perfect. This is just what we need. Cool. So that's there. And so now if we watch it, it should hopefully show up with the first beat. I don't know how that was looking for y'all with latency lag, but it's looks good to me. And you can do the same thing on the back. If you want to say have your awesome composer's name show up as well, you can just drag those on top of each other, scoot the back side of it back so it lines up again, so they both exit at the same time. And then you go there, right? And then you'd say, okay, well, let's move it around since we made a second copy of it. Open the inspector again by Brian. Ellis. We want it in a different font. Good enough for me. And and so you can do this, with a lot more videos. If let's say the mandolin, stopped playing at, maybe say that point, you can make a cut and then, make a second cut over here where they're, tacit, and they'll disappear. And then we say, wonderful, looks great. So then exporting is just quick export, and then you hit export, and then you name it final take 1, because we know we always do several of them. Okay, well, this was the second one because the first one was when I was prepping for it. And then we hit save, and then it renders. So that's all I prepared to talk about, because that's all I use in 98% of my video editing is, let's pull all the clips together, let's line everything up, and then we'll move them around so they look good in the screen, and then we'll go from there. I find that this is a very DaVinci has like all of the tools to make that happen, and is like simple enough for me to use that I'm happy just doing that. Does anyone have any questions or any thoughts?
Just curious. Are the videos like static once you figure out their positioning, like the way you did at the beginning? So like, for example, like when you took away the mandolin, like can you make the guitar like be the full screen? Like, is that something you can do? Change the position throughout the timeline?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So the way you would do that is the way I would do that is I would, instead of like importing it in again or something, I would just make some cuts here. So that way this guitar clip is on its own. And then you could go edit it to be its full size. So now if you were to watch this whole thing, it would look normal here, and then would go to just the guitar focus, and then it would come back to being everyone. Yeah. Other questions? Thank you, Dale. That's a good question. Alrighty. We'll save a little time then and give more time to talk about Final Cut and Tyler's Maxim SP thing.
Yeah, Brian, if you don't mind just leaving your screen up for a second, I just want to point out I also use DaVinci, and like for people interested in more advanced things, the color tab is actually a really robust color editing tool. There's a slight learning curve to it, but like I took a crash course for like 45 minutes and you learn the basics. So if you do want to mess around with colors, like definitely check this out. And then the Fairlight tab, I guess, is the music tab. You probably won't need it, but it does give you a little bit of like a DAW-like feeling, where you can edit audio last minute if you feel like you need to. And then the last cool thing about DaVinci, sorry, Brian, if you could go back to the media, sorry, could you go back to cut actually? And then in the top left, go to the media pool. Yeah, so the nice thing is that right now, Brian has a single timeline and it's called Timeline 1. But you can actually make multiple timelines. So if you want to organize like a larger scale project, you could organize it by having one timeline be like just the guitar or whatever, and then another timeline being a split screen, and then you can just line up timelines in a master timeline. It's just a nice workflow thing. And you can also organize your clips into bins. When I was working on projects with a lot of different clips, they have like folders, and it's very intuitive to keep everything organized. But those were just the three things. Yeah. But thanks so much, Brian.
One other thing I wanted to say, make sure you mute your video tracks before you export, So that way the only track that is still playing is like the final mastered track that you got from the audio engineer. Because otherwise, in addition to having the glorious track from the audio engineer, you'd also have like iPhone video on top of it, which, not ideal. So just those buttons there to make that happen really quickly. But thank you for sharing, Peter, the more sky's the limit kind of thing with this tool. Stuff that I will admit that I have not looked into just because I've been doing this level of stuff and this is what's worked for me. But yeah, thank y'all.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. Any last questions on DaVinci before we move on to Final Cut? If no, then I will turn it over to Nelson.
Hello, everyone. Could everybody hear me? Cool. All right, let me share my screen. I'm going to apologize in advance a little bit. 1 second. Oh, sorry, give me a minute. I'm on a new Mac, and all the security preferences are like, no, you shouldn't do anything. I did not know I was going to do this. There we go. Allow Zoom. It is not letting me share my screen. Give me what? A minute. Wait. There we go. Okay. Can everybody see? Perfect. All right. Sorry about that. So the biggest thing I'm going to cover here is not so much as general usage of Final Cut, because it is fairly intuitive, especially if you're coming from iMovie. The big difference, though, is just kind of the way it handles some of the, like the file structure can be a little bit confusing. So I'm going to cover that. And then just basically a general overview of where to find stuff. So the biggest thing to know is there's our libraries, there are events, and then there are projects. So library is an actual file on your folder. So if you go up here, yeah, you can see project, event, and library. Library is the big one. So it's going to be an actual thing. Like you can see there's one there. I'll just make one on my desktop and call it zFest demo. And that shows up here. And then it automatically creates this right here, which is an event. And an event is just basically another way of organizing stuff. So I have this untitled library. This is just where I keep a bunch of random stuff. But then I have all these other things. Like a while back, there was a robin's nest outside my house. And so then I have both the footage from that, and then as well as like the cuts that I put together from that. And I can keep that separate from other projects I've done in the past, where like combining up, some takes for a conductor of Brahms, which is this. So that's just generally what the events is for. You can see on this was something that I did for a youth orchestra, I believe in Arizona. I was able to put all the raw footage, separate in all of this stuff. So it's like, these are the files that they sent me. And I was able to keep that separate from, this is where all the stuff that I had synchronized, separate from, this is where the actual cuts that I was working with. It's just a way of organizing all of your stuff. And so this is where basically everything's going to be set, and the projects themselves are going to be like the video that you're going to be making. So if you want to have multiple versions of something, you can duplicate the project, and that's what you're going to be exporting. Does that make sense so far? Anybody have any questions? Did I explain that well? Okay, seems to be people are following. So import media, the other important thing to know, this is a little bit funny because I have people's faces blocking it, but this transcoding, the optimized and proxy media, if your computer is having trouble working with the video files, especially with working multiple of them, I would suggest going ahead and doing this. If not, it does take up a lot of hard disk space. They're really big files, like 20 gigabytes or something ridiculous. So if you're low on hard disk space, don't do it. But if you have plenty of hard disk space and your computer is having a little bit trouble, I recommend doing it. I also recommend it in general, always copying to the library. That way Final Cut will always, be able to find it, especially if you move it from one machine to another. It just helps in case you're keeping track of projects and, you accidentally clear out your downloads folder, then suddenly Final Cut can't find anything. Just makes your life easier. The other general thing to know is there are multicam clips. So rather than where Brian was showing in DaVinci, where you would go ahead and take two pieces of audio and line them up kind of, like this, and then try to line everything up like that, you can create a multicam clip. So you select, I just have a random piece of audio and some of the robins from my house. And then you go under new. I have a shortcut for it, so I actually forget where it is under here. Let me hear. Okay, yep, new. file, file, new, and then right here, multicam clip. And you do this, just name it. I usually call it sync, blah, blah, blah. And then it's going to take a minute. It's probably going to struggle for quite a while just because these aren't actually related, but there we go. And then you can see here, there's this little thing called sync, blah, blah, blah. Now you can double click this and open it, and you're going to see it show up on the bottom. And this is what it thinks is the proper sync. So it's like, this is just piano music from a recording a while back. And then you can see that over the robins. So, and then if it's not proper sync, you can move these around and get it to it actually lines up. It does a good job. It just looks at the audio and it lines it up. I would say like 90% of the time it's fine. Every once in a while it's funky and you can do it. You can also potentially have multiple things set up. So if I go to, for example, this, so I have, this to line up each student with the audio that they sent. And then in the overall cuts, I just have one big conglomerate. Each of these are little multicam clips. So I'll just work with this for a minute so you can see basically it's the same way as before. You're going to click on each clip in the timeline here. And then under this little video tab, it might be hidden. There's this thing right here to make it show video tab, and it's under this transform. You're going to have the scale, which is how you make it bigger or smaller. And then that's how and then you can also use the, where is it? I'm on a newer version, so I'm not used to everything. There is a position, not crop. Oh, sorry, position right here. Yep. These X and Y's is where you can position where it is in the frame. And so that just works the same way like Brian did as before. You can have it. If you want to make something disappear, the big thing is this little tab right here are your little controls for the cursor. So most of the time you press A and you just want to select and do stuff. The other big one is pressing B for the blade tool. And this allows you to cut in different spots. If you press the shift button, you can cut everything. But then that allows you to just grab, a little section and then you can delete it. The other big thing to know about Final Cut that's different than just about any other video editing platform is you can see there's this little gray portion here that's a little bit darker than what's above or below. This is the main part of your timeline. Anything that's in this part is going to get sucked to the left. So what I mean by that, so you see here, there's like this big clip number 30. If I delete that, all of that stuff just moved to the left. So it doesn't allow for blank space. However, if I copy something above it, I can move this around and stuff doesn't get sucked to the left. If I delete this, it doesn't move. However, if I do delete this, you can see right here, there's this little attachment. It's saying this is synced to this clip. So if I delete it, all of that gets moved to the left. It's a little bit weird if you've used iMovie before. This is probably completely intuitive because it's exactly the way that iMovie works as well. Let me just stop because I've been rambling for a little bit. Everybody following, I feel like I'm talking a little quickly. Is that all that's good so far? Okay, cool. Got some
I
nods.
just had a quick question.
Yeah, go for it.
When you drag things up to the top like that, is that clip being seen? Or is that just like a storage? Okay.
Yeah. So the whatever's on top is going to have priority of being seen.
Got it.
So if I move this up here, I mean, these are all robins, but if I go to, for example, this, if I move some of these people around, you might notice, I got to move this because I can't see it. See how, it's hard to tell, but the tuba player is on top of the violin player, but the violin player is underneath the others. You can just kind of see how it's on top of some and below others. And that's exactly how it's reflected here from top to bottom. Does that make sense? Cool. I think that's a majority of what you'll really need to know for this sort of stuff. Titles, it's on this upper part here. Right here is the titles. There's all sorts of ones. I suggest just sticking with the basics or the blur. It's pretty intuitive. Just drag and drop. The information for it will be on the right here. You got to make sure it's selected. And then, yep, there's a little button here for the titles. It gives you all sorts of, parameters. On this little dashes is where you can actually control the thing. So if it's here, let's see, I can change it to, just put whatever you want and it's there. So that's how you do titles. And the last thing that's a little bit confusing about Final Cut, excuse me, exporting is actually pretty odd. I'm just going to go over to this Robbins one. And then it's up in this top right. There's this little button for sharing, and that is being blocked. Can I move these? I can move the people. There we go. It's going to bring all these. What I recommend doing is going to add destination. And then from here, pick, how do you do this? I haven't done this in a while. Forgive me. Export file. And then it brings up a new one, format. And you want to go down to computer and then just pick the resolution that works. This right here, the one ending in 1080, that's your normal HD. This one right here that starts with the 4000 number, that's 4K. Everything else you can just kind of leave as is. If you use any of the others, it's going to be like a file format that's mostly and really only recognizable by Apple products. Not always super useful, but YouTube, I believe, still takes it. But it makes it much easier if you do this because it's your regular, MP4, excuse me. It's just your normal MP4 file that everything can read and understand. So again, just add destination, export file, and then you want to make sure it's under the publishing section, computer, and then I think the 1080 is completely fine. That's plenty of quality unless you really want to do 4K. So any other questions about Final Cut? Anything that you guys want to know how to do that I might not have covered?
Hi.
Yeah.
I have actually two questions.
Yeah, go for it.
And you can maybe, if you know the answer about iMovie, I would be interested to know for both. When you add like a new clip in iMovie or Final Pro, does he copy the file into like its own session, or does he use the file from the desktop, for example?
I think that depends on the settings. So at least in Final Cut, I'm not entirely sure about iMovie. I think by default, by drag and drop, by default, it just reads it off of the location that it is and does not copy it into the library. But I believe under here in generals editing, that wouldn't be under editing, import. Here we go. So by default, I have it set to the copy to library, but it can potentially change. That's why I recommend just going file, import, media, and just using this window so that way you can double check that the copy to library is checked. I believe it's something similar to that in iMovie as well, just to double check. That way you don't run into that issue of, you move something and suddenly you can't find any of your files. It's always a pain in the butt, I know. So that's what I would recommend.
And my second question is it possible to like export the session itself to be able to put it on like a external drive and be able to use it later?
So you're thinking of like take the entire project, all the footage, move it into like a hard drive and then work on a different computer kind of thing?
If yeah, that could be an example.
Yep. So that would be the use of the kind of the libraries. So if we go here, I'm gonna have to move the Zoom thing real quick. There we go. So this little thing right here is the Final Cut Pro library, and you can see. So this one is only 47 megabytes because all the media is right here. But you can just take this and it would contain any of the files in it. You can see this one here is 40 gigabytes because it has all of the video files in that library. So you should just be able to copy that one file, and everything will be there. Does that answer your question?
Almost. I think on iMovie, there's like one big file that's called like Bibliothèque iMovie, and it's not really accessible. It's just like a file that if you double click on it, it opens iMovie. It's not like a library. Like
there might be a way to create multiple files with iMovie. I'm not entirely sure. And this is something that's also tricky because Apple is kind of with every version of iMovie, they make it a little bit easier to use, but then also take away some features.
Right.
And so that might have been one of those features. I have not used iMovie in quite some time. I'm sorry, I can't really answer this for you, but that would in theory work with iMovie. The only problem is you would be dropping everything that you worked into iMovie. Because I know at least before it was just one massive iMovie file.
Yeah,
there might be a way to make multiple libraries of iMovie. I have a feeling not though, just knowing Apple's general direction with iMovie.
Right. Thank you.
Oh, one last thing. Speaking of kind of Apple's direction, you can get Final Cut for 90 days free. It's going on. So just Google free trial Final Cut and it'll come right up. So just a little side note in case anybody's struggling with iMovie. Any other questions? Cool. I think people happy. Peter, is there anything else that you'd like me to cover?
I think that's good with me.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nelson. Before I turn it over to Tyler to talk a little bit about Max MSP, I just wanted to say, like both Nelson and Brian showed us examples of like split screen, multiple musicians, which is not necessarily what your final project needs to look like. And if you're looking to do a score video or something like that, it might be more helpful to use a different editing software like iMovie. So iMovie has a restriction of having only two videos or two lines of videos at the same time. So you can line up as many videos in a single line as you want, but you can't overlay more than two, unless that has changed in recent versions. But my version of iMovie is like that. But if you're looking to do like a score video where you just have a score page that changes with the changing audio, iMovie would be great for. If you're looking to do a split screen thing, then one of these more robust softwares is probably necessary. But yeah, your final product does not have to look anything like that. It doesn't have to be a score video either. Those are like the two probably standard things. But you can go as wild and crazy as your heart desires. With that being said, I think we have a little bit of a wild and crazy idea coming up here with Tyler. I don't know if that's too much of a preface, but I'll turn it over to you.
It's pretty out there. Hi everybody. I'm Tyler. So what I am going to be talking about is nothing really to do with like a workstation for like video editing software. This is mainly using tools inside of Max MSP to build visuals for like a music video if you wanted to. And the one patch that I have so far, I'm still pretty new to this, but it specifically takes an audio signal and distorts and morphs the images that I build using that signal, so like using the decibel level. So I'm gonna get into it. Let me share my screen and the sound. Boom. And so what's gonna happen is I'm gonna open up Max here, and it's just going to pop up the patch. So you're going to see probably a flash, and then it's going to go into the video itself. So I built in, if it'll open, come on now. There we go. Nice. So this will pop up. It's probably pretty loud. What's happening here is I recorded a bass clarinet solo that I wrote and imported the audio to effect.
Hey, Tyler, do you mind turning up the gain on your interface? It's hard to hear you over the bass clarinet.
Absolutely. Is that better?
Maybe just a hair more, but yes, thank you.
I'll turn the bass clarinet down. But anyways, we actually don't need to listen to that. So what's happening with all of these graphics is inside of this patch that I built. Let me open it up a little bit more. So there's a lot going on here. Basically, what I can tell you is these visuals are built in a subset program inside Max called Jitter. And Jitter is used to create graphics. The main thing that's happening here is there's an object in Max called jit.world, and this is kind of the overall aspect of what's happening with these graphics. So the jit.world creates this space for graphics to exist. And then the specific graphics themselves are all kind of just random shapes. So you'll see here, it's unorganized, my bad. But down here, we have this other object called jit.gl.gridshape. So this is basically creating a shape of some sort. And what we can say is we can set that as a sphere. and give it just some basic attributes. And the color itself is taking it from this color object. So right now it is gray or black. And there are three of these jit.gl.grid shapes. And what is happening is they're all interacting with each other. So there is a sphere, there is another sphere, and I want to say, oh, and then there is a mesh for each of them, jit.gl.mesh. I am sorry that I can't really explain all of these, like each of these objects individually, um, as I got a lot of this code from a friend of mine and then kind of tweaked it myself. But what is happening is these attributes here. So whenever there is a moment in the piece that there is like a sudden hit or so, there's a timer here that is counting all the milliseconds. And I had to go in manually into this patch and I built this. It basically is a step sequencer, but is taking like the second count for the entire piece and saying when it lines up with this second, which I had to manually input, but you could probably find a better way to do it, and say that's when an object is going to change. So whenever there was like a hit in the track itself, and I just lined up, I took like where the transients were inside of my DAW and said like, oh, the at this millisecond, as much as I could get to it, this is where this shift is going to happen. And then you'll see it just flash right here. What that bang does is it triggers a random attribute setting for all of these different objects to interact with each other. So each shape that you generate within Jitter, you can modify the attributes of it. So when these objects are changing, it'll also, sorry, content warning, there's some flashing lights with this, just to make sure everybody will be okay with that. Okay, so these graphics are all kind of intertwining the different spheres. So you see here, this would just be like a smaller sphere. Now we have a bunch of them. And I think there's also a cylinder that is created to make these kind of like longer shapes as well. So these are all interacting together whenever they have these larger hits. I'll turn my volume up just so you can see what I mean. Yeah, so you can hear whenever there is like a hit section or like a change in whatever's happening in the recording, the visuals also change with it. So when I said that the audio is being sent in to affect these shapes and kind of move them around, the basic patch that I took this code from was using pretty much just like a kick drum or like a drum sample to modify a sphere in itself. So I kind of just duplicated that. And the part of this patch over in this area, let's see here. Sorry, I got asked to do this last minute, so I haven't really had time to prep this. But I will say, I believe part of these objects down in here, the jit.slide and the jit.graph, these are taking audio from this recording, I believe, and is basically what is making the images in the sphere or the shapes modify and move. And you can also set different attributes like mathematically inside of Max to say like what exactly it's going to do. Yeah, and then the patch itself is like when you open it up, it auto plays with a load bang and then immediately goes into that full screen. And then this was just a piece that I put on my own YouTube channel. So I screen captured this patch and let it do its own thing a couple of times. And the results for when it does play, they're always random. So I had to get a couple of different recordings together and then splice them up as to which ones I liked the best. Just because I didn't want there to be a really big flash in the middle of my piece, just in case. That is a lot of information, but this is about the basics of it. I'm really sorry I can't go too deep into what each thing does in here, but The basics of this are that jitter is really cool, and you can use it to create visuals using different audio levels. That's about it. Does anybody have any questions?
For those of us inclined to potentially try to learn all this, do you have any resources for learning Max?
Yeah, definitely. Within Max itself, there are a lot of just tutorials and help files. Pretty much every Max object has a help file. I can demonstrate that here if I unlock this bad boy. And so if I click on this delay, option click if you're using a Mac, it opens up a help file. And this explains pretty much everything what the object itself does. You can do that for all the jitter objects. There are quite a few good books to check out. I think that VJ Manzo, who is a coder and works with Max specifically a lot, I think he has written a book on jitter and just the basics of it, what you all can do with it. That is the only resource I know of, besides just basic YouTube tutorials as well.
Yeah, I would say YouTube tutorials are really great, especially if you're just learning, because there's a bunch of people who essentially are learning it along with you, and they just like kind of post their studies, and they're super helpful. And it helps you wrap your head around the idea that it's like an experimental visual programming language, and so like there is not really there's like some best practices out there, but it really is meant for people to like dive in and just like put things together and see what happens.
Yeah, and that was kind of the process with this too. I found, or I was given some code to play around with, and then I just kind of experimented until I found something that I enjoyed. So it really does come down to just kind of improvising with it a bit. But obviously, this can all be pretty overwhelming as well. So knowing the basics before jumping in straight into jitter is really important as well. Anybody else? Okay, cool. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tyler. I put both on the YouTube chat and the Zoom chat the download for Max MSP. I believe, unless it's changed in the last year since I've used it, you can download it and use it full functionality. You just can't save any projects unless you buy a subscription. But as long as you just like keep it open and running in the background of your computer, like you can kind of have it.
Yeah, you can
for
use any
recursive.
patches that are sent to you. And I think there's also, they do a 10-month, $10 a month subscription for it, but I don't think that adds up to paying off the full price. But if you are affiliated with a academic institution, they have pretty good deals.
Great. Does anybody have any questions about any of the software we looked over before we get off YouTube, and then we can talk more about visual products and like zFestival specific stuff if you all want.
Would you want me to do a lighting demo before leaving YouTube, or do you want me to do that at all, or?
I think since we have the info in the document we set around, I feel like we probably don't need to do it on YouTube as well. But thank you. Great. I will take us down off YouTube.